My name is Safeer Hassan, and I'm the corn systems manager with Bayer. I support the corn rootworm commercial traits like SmartStax Pro, and VT4 Pro. Today we are here at Atlantic Iowa Farm, and we will be talking about corn rootworm management, especially the corn rootworm digs for the corn rootworm injury evaluation, and the steps that kind of follow there for the management of it. So when it comes to the corn rootworm, it is something that you have to take a proactive approach. Decisions you make this season will definitely affect your next season, especially if you're going back on corn on those fields. So that is why it's important to take that proactive approach. And before we get into the root digs itself, and Edwin shows us the demonstration on that, who is this for? This is mostly for people who have been planting corn on corn for multiple years. A guy who may have seen injury in his crop last year if they had corn on those fields. They could have done the root digs, or when they were harvesting they saw a bunch of large corn. So it's for those guys. And the third case is probably for not applicable for everyone, but this would be for the people who may be doing their first year corn, but they are in the areas where they are seeing the extended diapause with the northern corn rootworm, or they may be in the areas where they are seeing the western corn rootworm variant in those soybean fields. So also in those cases you want to make sure that you are checking your first year corn fields too. So with this, I'm going to hand it over to Edwin, who's going to go through the process of how to do the root digs and how to do the injury evaluation.
Yeah, thanks, Safeer.
Yep.
So my name is Edwin Benkert. I'm the Seed and Trait Technology Development Representative based out of Atlantic here at our Bayer farm here. And I'm going to be covering corn rootworm root digs, like Safeer said. Why are we doing a root dig? How do we do a root dig? And then how do we interpret the results that we see after we do that root dig? So the reason why we want to dig roots is because rootworm, the life stage that we're most concerned about is going to be that larval stage or that worm stage, so to speak. And during this life stage, they're in the soil, and that's when they're going to be feeding on the roots in the soil. So the only way to see how much feeding has occurred on the roots is to go out and do a root dig, right? So what we'll do is I'm going to step over here, and this is where I'll be doing the root dig. Now, when we're trying to figure out where in a field we should be doing a root dig, the areas of the field that we want to target are going to be areas where we see lodging from rootworms. So in severe cases, when we have enough feeding and the rootworm larvae have fed enough on those roots, we can actually get a situation where the plants will lodge or fall over because they don't have a root structure to help hold the plant up. And so in those cases, we'll either see plants that are lodged, or like we have back here, those plants will lodge, but corn always wants to grow back straight up. So you'll get what we call a goosenecking or a bent shape in the stalk. And so if we're out and we're digging roots to evaluate feeding, we want to go to areas of the field where we see lodging or gooseneck plants. And when we're in those areas, we want to select plants at random. And we want to go along, we want to try to dig 10 plants, and once we dig those 10 plants, we'll take the average root injury from those to get an average for that spot in the field. So once we've found our spot in the field that we want to dig from, and I'm just going to dig off the edge here so we can see. Obviously I would want to be well away from the edge in the field, but we're going to go and we're going to place our shovel. We want to make sure we're going straight down with the shovel. If we go in at an angle, there's a chance that we could cut some of those roots off. And if we cut the roots off, we're not going to be able to see the injury there. So we want to make sure we're going straight down, and we want to be about 4 to 6 inches away from the base of that plant where it goes into the soil. So we'll step down. Depending on the soil, this might take a little more work than other cases, and we're just going to try to pop that root out. And so now we have the root out of the soil. You can see that one came out pretty easily. Sometimes you've got to go from both sides to get it out of there. The idea is we don't want to hear that snapping sound of roots breaking off in the soil as we're pulling that plant out. Once we get the plant out, what I like to do is I'll take a set of clippers and I'll just cut the top portion of the plant off to make it easier to handle and carry. And then I'll also gently knock some of that soil off, you know, either with the boot or you can knock it off on the ground. The key here is we're trying to remove some soil so that it's not so much that we have to wash off later, but we don't want to break roots off again. So that's our whole goal, is to make sure we're preserving those roots. Once we get enough soil knocked off, I like to have a couple of 5-gallon buckets with some water. I'll set the roots in the bucket. Depending on how dry or the different soil type, may only need to soak for 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes they got to soak overnight to loosen that soil up. But once we get that soil loosened up, we can then take a garden hose and we'll get that running here pretty quick. And we're just going to wash the soil off of those roots so we can see the feeding. And so, obviously, I dug these, you know, probably 15, 20 minutes ago. We're a little dry, so they probably needed to soak a little longer. But we can see some of the feeding from the corn rootworm here on this root system. And so, when corn rootworm feed on roots, they do what we call pruning. And that pruning injury is going to look like this here. So this is a severe case of feeding injury, but as those larvae come in, they start off and they keep feeding back all the way until they get to the stalk in these heavy cases. And so that's where you get that brown root tissue. Instead of being nice, white, healthy tissue, it turns kind of that brown, necrotic tissue color. And when we're looking at this and we're evaluating these, we're going to use what's called the 0 to 3 root injury rating scale. And so that 0 to 3 scale, if we think of the way a corn plant develops its roots, so a corn plant's going to put its roots off in what we call nodes. So circular rings around the stalk. They're going to come off in nodes here. We're going to rate injury on nodes 4, 5, and 6. And evaluate the feeding there. And with that 0 to 3 scale, we're going to use 1.5 inches as our criteria. So if we measure from the base of the stalk out to the tip where the feeding is, if it's 1.5 inches or less, then we're going to count that as feeding. If it's over 1.5 inches, then we're not going to count that towards the score. We count the number of roots on each node that fall within that 1.5 inch criteria, and then we take that number and divide it by the total number of roots on each node. We're going to do this on 4, 5, and 6. We'll get a number between 0 and 3. 0 would equal a nice healthy root system, like this one here. You know, there's no feeding here. This is a nice healthy root system, what we would want to see. A 3 would be the equivalent of, you know, 3 of these nodes having been fed completely to 1.5 inches or less. The reason why we want to assign that rating is university research and our data suggests that if we have a 1 on that scale, that corresponds to around a 15 to 17% yield loss just from the root injury. So once we've went out, we've dug our roots, we've washed them off, we've scored those 10 roots and gotten an average. Now we can start thinking about how we want to manage that feeding depending on what the score is. And I'll let Safeer step in and we can talk through some of those different management steps based on the root feeding.
So let's say you dug a field, you clean your roots and you did your injury evaluation, you are looking at your total score, and your average score comes about 0.5 or half a node or above that. What that really means is that is a place where you need to kind of start thinking about different management tactics for the next year, and what you need to do for the next year. The first thing that you need to really think about is the crop that you'll be planting on that field for next year. So let's say if a grower says, I'm planting soy or any other crop, then corn on that field. That would solve most of his problem. That's a really good place to be, because we want in those cases growers to rotate. But then the other scenario would be a grower says, hey, I am not in a position where I can plant soy or any other crop. I need to plant corn back again on that field. So in those cases, we need to first ask the question, what you have going on in your field right now. You already know that you had the injury in your field. What you need to do is you need to control your beetles at that time. And this would be a prime time to control your adult beetles, because each one of those females, they are laying on an average about 500 eggs, and next year you will have 500 larvae coming from there. So you will have a much bigger population if you don't control it now. So that should be your first step. So control your beetles. An easy way to do is you could go to your academic entomology extension pages, and you can find a lot of information over there. But an easy way to do is you go and scout different parts of your field. You do about 20 to 30 plants, and you look at the number of beetles you count on each one of those plants. And if your average is coming to 0.75 and above, that tells you that you have met that economic threshold level where you could go ahead and spray those fields. So you spray those fields, take care of those beetles for this year, and that will take care of your next year basically. So the next step is, if a grower has to kind of answer and say, what hybrid I had on this field, if that hybrid was protected for the corn rootworm traits in it, or it did not have that protection in it. So if a grower says, hey, I planted a hybrid that was protecting me only for the above ground insects but not for the below ground insects, in those cases the good option would be to go to a biotech trait like a Smart Stacks Pro or VT4 Pro. In those cases you could go with those, and that would be a good option with some of the other management tactics, but that would be your option. But let's say grower says, I planted Smart Stacks or one of the traded products from the competitor side where they already had a corn rootworm trait in them. In those cases, the best option for that grower would be to rotate. So that's our first recommendation. But we do realize there would be cases where a grower says, hey, I got dairy or I got cattle and I cannot go and plant any other crop, or I'm in a long-term contract. I need to do corn. In those cases, we recommend that a grower have a good conversation with their agronomist, with their local agronomists who understand their areas, and they can make the recommendations. But the takeaway over here is that there is no silver bullet when it comes to corn rootworm control. You have to do multiple things. You have to do your beetle management. You have to do your crop rotation, and then you have to top that off with the insect protection traits. And this is a combination of everything. It's not just a one solution for all. That's our recommendation. If you need more information, we are here to talk to you today, but the Bayer Traits website always has really good information, or your own extension entomologist. Almost every university has really good information on how to do the scouting and how to do the best management practices for the corn rootworm control. Anything to add from your end?
No, I think you covered it. Like Safeer said, we have to use multiple tools in the toolbox. And I think the biggest thing, getting an idea of what our adult beetles are doing in the field, but then also digging some roots and seeing how much feeding. So getting an understanding of what's going on in the field so then we can more effectively manage it. So, yeah.